That's the first thing they're gonna get on this channel is that big
I
yawn.
like it.
Yep. It should be live.
All right. Doing it live. We're going to get this.
And then you just need to send me that embed code.
Yep. Get the embed code out. Except I'm not seeing the live stream on my computer yet. Live now. Here we are.
And then just send it to me in don't send it to me on here on Zoom because it'll mess up the viewing window. Send it.
It says embedding disabled by request.
Shit. How do I unrequest that?
It's got to be somewhere in the settings for the like. If you go up to the YouTube top right, and you remember you go to the
I'm in the live stream thing.
Okay.
Stream options.
That'd be a way to enable it.
Advanced settings.
I'll start looking through them over here too.
Public.
Here we go. Go to advanced settings, and then there's basic info and advanced tabs.
Uh-huh.
If you click over to advanced settings, once you've already gone into advanced settings,
Uh-huh.
on the halfway down on the left, allow embedding is an option there. You cannot embed live streams.
Learn more. Well, that sucks.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to embed your live stream on a site, make sure you have an approved AdSense account linked to your YouTube account. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw up a link to the live stream.
Yeah, let's just do it on YouTube.
Yep, that's what's going to have to happen.
We're not going to be able to embed it.
No, that's fine. We'll get that worked out for next week.
Mm-hmm.
So I need a link to the live stream because I don't want to click into it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. We're still live, right?
Yep.
Okay.
So instead of embedding, I will do this.
Black. Right. Okay, I sent it to you in.
Awesome.
Black. All right.
Copy. Update. And I'll tweet out the YouTube link as well.
There was also a question about Mike Wallace as well, so we can cover that. Mike Wallace and Flacco. Those Jason Lewis. Did you send out the link?
Twitter's freezing. That's great. Let's see if I go to rotoviz.com/live. Cool. Well, it's on the RotoViz live page.
Oh, you got it on there? Oh, just the link on there?
No, just the link.
Okay.
And now I need to get Twitter open.
Tweet that out.
All right, 1.5 minutes.
Well, I think we can just get started pretty much. Or
Yeah, let's wait till shortly after 11, like a few seconds after.
okay, I'm gonna shoot the link out on Twitter though. Did you already shoot it out?
I did.
I mean, we gotta give people a chance. Before we start jumping into stuff.
All right, let's do it.
All right.
Just give yourself a couple beats and then do the intro.
All right, we'd like to welcome everybody to the first RotoViz Live. Thanks for joining us, being with us. We got about 10 people watching now, so, you know, hopefully
Record numbers.
Yes, we're doing big digits right now. We're going to go through some DFS questions. We have a hashtag set up, hashtag RotoViz Live. You can send us questions in the chat here. So we have a couple different ways you can reach us. Before we get started, the little note on the screen, 30% viewer discount. If you go to rotoviz.com/podcast, that's how you can get that discount to all of our NFL content. Great way to get the same content for a cheaper price if you're not a RotoViz subscriber yet. As far as who we are, that's Nick. You can follow him at RotoDoc. You got me, I'm Ben. Follow me at Yards Per Gretch on Twitter. We do the On the Daily podcast that publishes every Thursday for your morning commute, but we're going to be following up here on that. We're going to be following up with some listener questions and just generally hanging out this morning. So let's get into it. One of the first questions we had this morning was from, I think it was from @DadRunner, right?
Yeah, @DadRunner. So
sent us a question about what to do with the Buffalo backfield. So, Nick, what are you doing with the news that McCoy is expected to be active now and should play some snaps? What are you doing with that news?
Yeah, so it sounds like LaShawn McCoy will play about 30%, or sorry, about 30 snaps, maybe 25 to 30 snaps was the initial report. That still remains to be seen. Of course, we haven't gotten the updated inactives or anything like that. So once the official inactives come out, we'll have to see if LaShawn McCoy actually is active, first of all. But let's assume for a second that the 25 to 30 snap is about right. This game should only see about 55 offensive snaps. Both Buffalo and Miami play a slower than league average pace, so they're only projected about 55 snaps. That means he's going to play about half of the snaps, almost exactly half, if that projection is true, the 25 to 30. So you can't play LaShawn McCoy at all, really. And then Gillislee is the interesting option. He's at $3,000 on DraftKings, minimum salary. Miami actually is a good matchup. They're pretty bad against the run. They just haven't allowed a lot of rushing touchdowns or anything like that. But if Gillislee does play about half the snaps, I don't think he's cash game usable, but I think he's interesting in a GPP where he's 3K. If he gets a touchdown and maybe a reception or two and then about 60, 70 yards on the ground, I think that's, that with that touchdown, I think that's something to consider because that's a 12 to 15 point day at a $3,000 price tag that you could get in a GPP. So I wouldn't own him a ton in GPPs, but I think in that 10% ownership range is up to there is feasible because I think it'll be less than that given the news that McCoy will be playing.
Yeah, and one take I have on this is that with Robert Woods out, they're starting Justin Hunter, Marquise Lee, Walt Powell. Those are going to be their main three receivers. Obviously, Charles Clay gets a slight bump, but he's also dinged up a little bit. He's been questionable for 3 or 4 weeks in a row now, leading into games, and he's been playing, but he hasn't put up any huge lines. So I do think there's some potential for Buffalo to go even more run heavy than usual, particularly if they get into good game scripts. If they get out ahead of Miami, which Miami has not looked good recently. I think Miami has a little bit of potential in this game, but if Buffalo does get out ahead, I would expect to see a lot of running. So I think that could benefit Gillislee as well. But then the other question that's kind of a negative on him is how much are they going to use the other running backs? How much are they going to use Reggie Bush? How much are they going to use Williams? Because if McCoy's playing that much, we don't know, what Gillislee's share of the RB2, or if you want to call it that, of the rest of the workload is. And so I think that's an interesting spot too. So initially I had Gillislee in cash. Right now I'm off of that. And
I think the other thing to consider is the fact that at game time they're projecting about 15-mile-an-hour winds. So I don't know how the passing game is going to fare. That's kind of right on that threshold where you start to get concerned about the passing game. So that's just something to be cognizant of as well. That could lead to more rushes, which could lead to a higher percentage of the total plays being rushes. Now, again, that might reduce the total number of plays because you're running off the clock more, but that is something to keep in mind. I think if you're playing this game, obviously with, as you mentioned, with Robert Woods out, that means we could see some Justin Hunter. We could see some Marquise Goodwin. I think Goodwin's a terrible play because of the wind. I think Hunter at $3,000 may be the better play, but I still am not loving it because of the wind. So I really think if you're playing this game on the Buffalo side, you've got to be playing Gillislee in GPPs, and other than that, I'm not really touching this game because there's no way McCoy's going to hit his value only playing half the snaps, and you're really concerned about upside here. So in a GPP, obviously we're not playing Gillislee in cash, so I'm just concerned about upside, and I think there is enough upside that maybe Reggie Bush doesn't get a large chunk of the snaps that Gillislee has upside for a 15-point day, which would be 5x at a $3,000 value on DraftKings.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think sorry, I was just pulling up Clay's stats as well. He's the only other guy that I would potentially consider, but
yep,
he's out at 5 receptions so far this year. To me, he's he doesn't have the upside. Even if he got in the end zone, it wouldn't be a huge boom game to your lineup. There's just other tight ends that I think could go for 2 touchdowns, that could go for more than 5 receptions in a game. Even low price like Clay is, I would say Cameron Brate's in that class. Jack Doyle's certainly in that class in terms of multiple touchdowns. Maybe not in terms of more than 5 receptions, but to me, Clay is okay, stable floor, but even like how good is his floor anyway? I mean, it's like it speaks to being more of a cash game option than a GPP option, but then it's not even that great of a line for your cash game if he does turn out a 5 for 50 or 5 for 40 line. Woods out, I do think he has a little bit more appeal. So if he can get up to 6-7 catches in this game, I mean, if he sees 10 targets or something, which is I think in the realm of possibilities, he could be an interesting cash game option, I think, but probably not somebody that I'm taking shots on in GPPs thinking he's going to win me a tournament.
Yeah. So one question I had for you, Ben. I know both you and I were on, obviously, midweek when the first news came out. We were both on Gillisley and Cash. How does this news now affect your cash game roster construction as a whole? Kind of bigger picture with what you're doing with wide receiver and running back and maybe even like the tight end position or something.
Yeah, I've had a little bit of a tilting morning with my cash lineup. So I was pretty comfortable going up with 3 wide receivers, or I guess I shouldn't say comfortable, but I was paying up, and I do a couple different cash lineups each week. I know a lot of people like to only do one. I like to vary it a little bit because often I see certain plays as being somewhat similar, and even though I might find one to be the most optimal option, I like to spread my risk a little bit. Often I'll have maybe 5 or 6 plays the same, but I'll do a couple 3v3s and switch out some lineups. So the different variations I had have all been 3 high-priced wide receivers at first, and mainly that's because I don't really trust any of the mid-level or lower-level wide receivers as cash options, frankly. Tyrell Williams' name has been thrown out. You wrote up both Antonio Gates and Hunter Henry this week. Atlanta's not good against tight ends. They have Desmond Trufant, not necessarily shadowing, but playing on Tyrell plenty. And more to the point, I could see San Diego game planning to play through their 2 tight ends, which they did last week. They were the top 2 players in air yards, which you also noted this week. Well, and from Josh Hermsmeyer's great air yards article. So that's very interesting to me in terms of I could see them running a lot of 2 tight end sets and those 2 as the main options in the passing game, which to me makes Tyrell Williams a little bit riskier and not as safe as I think a lot of people think. One of the names that I was considering was Mike Wallace with Steve Smith out. Jets can't defend the deep ball, et cetera, but we don't know what Joe Flacco's health is.
Right.
We're hearing questionable things there. So in terms of my cash game lineup, I've been at three high-priced receivers, but Gillisley was kind of a linchpin to making that happen. Now I'm considering Zach Zenner, which I don't like. But they're facing Washington. Washington's horrible in run DVOA, run defense in general, fantasy points to running backs. So I'm not concerned about Justin Forsett. Dwayne Washington is out, or it sounds like he will be inactive. So Zenner to me at 3,500 becomes cash game viable, particularly as it relates to the current roster construction that I have. But when I start guys in like that, I don't feel as confident in my cash lineup. So
yeah, I totally understand that. Now, of course, the thing with Zenner is he did play the majority of the running back snaps last week. Justin Forsett only had 5 rush attempts. Zenner had 14 against the LA Rams. He averaged 4.1 yards per carry. He had 2 targets, caught them both for 19 yards. He put up a 9.7 point fantasy day. Now this week, that was last week when he was at $3,000 on DraftKings. This week he's 3,500. However, it's against the Washington Redskins, and they're really bad. I mean, really bad against the run. You can run on the Redskins very easily. So, they're 31st in DVOA against the rush. So I think this is a situation where, they don't have the same personnel as 2 weeks in a row. They're missing Eric Ebron. They're missing Theo Riddick. They're missing Dwayne Washington. So with all 3 of these guys gone the second week in a row, we're going to see the same personnel. It just comes down to, do we expect Forsett's share to increase? Because if not, if it's going to be the same share, I think Zach Zenner is potentially playable in cash games, especially if you want to go the pay up at wide receiver route. Now, if you don't, I think it's perfectly fine to pay up at 2 wide receivers and then maybe pay down for I was thinking earlier in the week somebody like Tyrell Williams, but it's kind of gross down here in this lower portion of the wide receiver range. I think Golden Tate could be an option in this same offense as Zach Zenner. So that way you could get off of Zenner and onto Tate in cash games because remember, with all these passing weapons gone, Riddick, Ebron, Even Dwayne Washington could catch in the pass game. The wide receivers are just going to see a ton of targets. That's what happens. Last week Golden Tate had 10 targets, and Marvin Jones had his share of targets. Anquan Bolden had a bunch of targets. So they're just going to throw to the wide receivers again this week, and that means Golden Tate is certainly possible in cash games, and he's not going to be the one that sees Josh Norman there in that Redskins offense. He'll get some Breland, he'll get some snaps over the middle, and those are the Redskins' two weakest spots compared to whoever Josh Norman's going to be. So I think this is potentially also a spot where you could pay up at 2 wide receivers, drop down and use either a guy like Golden Tate. You could use, as I mentioned, Tyrell Williams. I don't think we can quite use Jamison Crowder. I was, interested in him, especially with Jordan Reed out again. He's got a good matchup in the slot against Quandre Diggs, but he's just not been seeing the volume recently, so I don't think he's really in play in cash games.
What? Oh, so is that kind of what is like? How are you feeling in terms of your cash game roster? I was going to ask you the same question. Where did you kind of start, and how are you reacting today based on what we've seen?
Yeah, so I guess my original thought, obviously with the Gillislee news, was like you, pay up at wide receiver. I was paying up. I was trying to tinker around with either AJ Green, Allen Robinson, Mike Evans, Amari Cooper, like 3 of those 4.
Or Julio, if you can afford it.
Obviously, Julio, if you can afford him. I don't think this week is possibly a week where I could afford him, given I want to play DeMarco Murray, not Latavius, DeMarco Murray in the running back position. So that's my big thing there. Is I'm absolutely, definitely playing DeMarco Murray. So that means I can't pay up for Julio unless I, pay down at basically everything else really cheaply, and I don't think that's going to work very well. So I'm probably not playing Julio in cash, but I think he's a great GPP play.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. We got a couple questions in the chat. First of all, Cooper or Evans on FanDuel this week? They're priced almost identical. It's Evans for me. What about you?
Yep, it's Mike Evans for me. I think, even though it's half PPR on FanDuel, I think the fact that Mike Evans just should see so much more volume. I think he's probably got a better touchdown potential, and Amari Cooper should be lined up across Jalen Ramsey, who's this phenom rookie. He was drafted 5th overall by the Jaguars. I think that potentially would tip me over towards Mike Evans, and obviously with Vincent Jackson out, the corpse of Vincent Jackson really now is a corpse. Mike Evans is probably just going to get so much volume. It's a tempo up game against San Francisco. I think I've got to go with Mike Evans.
Yep, that's pretty much my take as well. Volume for me, I think Evans is probably going to, not probably, but has the potential to lead in targets. How about the news regarding Jamal Charles this morning? This also added to my cash game tilt. This morning, I readjusted most of my cash game lineups when I first got up, because the original news was that Jamal Charles would be out, and it was, okay, I got to get Spencer Ware in 100% of every lineup, cash, GPP, whatever, because I think if Jamal Charles is out, that makes Ware just a phenomenal play. New Orleans can't stop the run. They're going to give up rushing TDs. It's just the Chiefs don't really like to throw in the red zone. The issue I have with Charles being active, and now the news has changed, Charles being active in a limited workload, is last week Spencer Ware saw 26 touches. Charles saw 11. But in the fourth quarter, Charles didn't touch the ball. It was 23-10, then it went up to 26-10. They were significantly ahead for the fourth quarter. Charles didn't touch the ball. Ware got 13 touches in the fourth quarter. So put another way, in the first 3 quarters, the touch count was 13-11, Ware to Charles. It was actually very, very close. Yeah. And importantly, 4 of Charles' 11 touches came inside the 10-yard line. Only 3 of Ware's the entire game. I think they were all in the first 3 quarters as well. Came inside the 10. So they're using Charles in those high leverage spots. I don't know what the purpose is for that. You got a guy who's banged up. I don't know what their reasoning is, but that's what they're doing. That's what they did. And I think that is a concern for Ware. I still think he's cash game viable. He's almost like, I don't want to say he's a lock, but he's like, I feel very confident that he can get that 100-yard bonus rushing this week. He hasn't been using the pass game as much. I'm a little concerned Charles vultures the touchdown. Those are my kind of concerns, so it's gotten me a little off the 100% Ware. But I do like him. What do you think?
Yeah, so for me, I think the reports on Jamal Charles are that it would be pretty limited. I would think even more limited than last week. So you're right. He is used in some of these high leverage situations, but I think, just the fact that New Orleans is so bad against the run, I think Spencer Ware is a great play. You can use him in cash games. I'm not sure if I will be. I haven't quite settled on my final cash lineup because I still want to hear, of some of these other news situations. Well, I'm waiting on. Sounds like Terrell Pryor will play, but we haven't gotten confirmation on that. Different things like that. I'm listening to some of these certain situations because, for example, if Terrell Pryor were out, I would probably like to use Gary Barnidge in cash games, but if he's playing, I might go a different route. So I haven't quite settled on my final cash game roster, but I usually only play one. Occasionally, I'll play a second if I think there's two guys I really like equally in the same price range. But so Spencer Ware currently isn't in my cash game lineup as it stands, but I will be playing him all over the place in GPPs. I do have one lineup where I have. In GPP, I have both Spencer Ware and Jamal Charles, but I'm really not using much Jamal Charles because it sounds like he's going to be pretty delimited. So I even might, on that Spencer Ware Jamal Charles stack, and I'm stacking them with Kansas City Chiefs defense in that game because I think this is a game, if the Chiefs defense plays really well, which we know New Orleans struggles on the road, if they get a couple interceptions or turnovers, that'll set up a lot of touchdown situations. So all Jamal Charles has to do is punch in one and maybe get a couple receptions and a big play, and he'll hit enough value in a GPP, and then Spencer Ware could just go off. But I think I might change that based off the reports of Jamal Charles. I might just fade him completely. Could come back to bite me, but these reports aren't sounding too promising on Jamal Charles this morning.
Yeah, I think I'm off Charles entirely. I think the price tag went up, to what is it, 5,700 on DK. I'm not sure what it is on FanDuel, but it's at a price where I'm not confident that he can hit value with that workload. We got a few more questions in here, though. I'm interested in this one. Is pivoting off DeMarco to Freeman viable in cash? For me, it is. You're really big on Murray this week, and I want to know what your thoughts are on that.
Is this on DraftKings or FanDuel? Because I wouldn't really consider it a pivot at $1,300 on DraftKings.
Yeah, I think the question's probably relating to needing the extra cap, and you get off of DeMarco to free up some cap and go down to Devontae. I think that's viable. I think you can get 80 to 90% of DeMarco's expected output from Devontae. I actually think that's an interesting.
See, I think the safest play here is DeMarco Murray. We know he gets the volume. He doesn't have a mate in the backfield. He's got Derrick Henry, but Derrick Henry's really not going to split the touches with him like we could potentially see from Tevin Coleman. So this could also just be a Julio day. So I think this is a situation where in cash games, I want DeMarco. If I have to pick between the two, and I'm not saying Devontae Freeman is a bad cash game play. I just think if I have to pick between the two, I want DeMarco Murray. That's the safest workload. He's averaged over 3x value this year on DraftKings. He's averaged 22.5 DraftKings points. He's priced at 7,200, so 3x value would be 21.6. So his average points per game output this year is over 3x, and he's playing the worst rush defense in the league, the worst defense in the league to passing to the running back position. So 32nd in DVOA against the rush, 32nd in DVOA against pass-catching running backs, and DeMarco Murray is active in both phases of those games. We've seen him get reception touchdowns. We've seen him get targets in the red zone. We've seen him get rushes in the red zone. This just sets up to be a day where if DeMarco Murray is averaging 3x, he's probably going to get over 3x, well over 3x. And if you get over 3x with your expensive guy, that's way more important than hitting 3x with your $3,000 guy. And that's huge. So I think DeMarco Murray, I love him in cash games. I can understand the pivot off of him, or air quote, fade him in cash games, because if everybody's on him, he will probably be 75% owned in cash games, and he does put up a dud. You're probably looking at cashing pretty good, so there is some theory there. But I like that theory a little bit more for GPPs because he'll be 30, 40% owned in GPPs, I think. So I like that theory a little bit more in GPPs.
You're going with. I'm totally with you. I think Murray's a top running back play on the board. All your reasoning there is very sound. But I think that obviously decisions have to be made with the high-priced receivers. Well, are you finding ways to fit all three of the higher-priced receivers and DeMarco, or what are? Because I think the question essentially would be: would he be more willing to pivot down from DeMarco to Freeman than down from Allen Robinson or Mike Evans or whoever you have at wide receiver down to say like a Golden Tate or a Mike Wallace?
I'd probably rather pivot on the wide receiver position because we know Golden Tate should see volume this week, given the situation there in Detroit. I'm not so.
I think I would go the other way on that one, but
I disagree because we know wide receiver production is more consistent. And if we pay down at the running back position, the consistent running back we know of is DeMarco Murray. That's like the most consistent running back we know of in the best matchup. I think Devontae Freeman has a lot more risk involved. So if you're pivoting down to him, then pivoting down from Allen Robinson, who I think, if I had to pick one of those expensive guys, I'd probably pivot down from Allen Robinson to like Golden Tate.
So the case for Freeman is essentially he's been playing a little bit more each week relative to Tevin Coleman. He's kind of getting back into more of a 60-40 workload split.
But is that just small sample size? Is that
could be, but
and that's what I said. That's what I'm saying. There's risk there.
But they're in a phenomenal spot, even if he's 50% owned. So
I get that, but I mean, there's no risk with Golden Tate. It's not like all of a sudden.
He lines up more on the outside. Washington's outside corners are really strong.
Rashad Breeland is not that good this year. He's been pretty bad, actually. And then he's going to line up in the slot. Because Josh Norman's going to see mostly Marvin Jones there. So I don't think there's that much risk in Golden Tate.
There's a ton of risk. Yeah, I mean,
they're going to have to throw all day too because this game could be pretty high scoring. So I just think Golden Tate's a lock for minimum 8 targets.
He's a good play. I don't want to position myself as anti-Golden Tate here. I just think that those top receivers are really strong plays, and I do think that Freeman has the potential to put up DeMarco Murray-like numbers this week. But Murray is in an amazing spot. I'm not going to fault you that. I think we're kind of splitting hairs a little bit.
Yep, I agree.
My point with the Freeman workload, even if it's 50-50, the one point I want to make is that hack, that RotoViz screener hack that Fantasy Juice wrote about recently, where you can pull in, you can export out expected points in the rushing and receiving game out of the RotoViz screener. You can add them up. You can come up with total running back workload for a team. If you do that this week, you'll see that Atlanta's running back expected points as a team is the second highest in the league. So even if Freeman's only seeing 50% of the work, that's a team that gives a lot of opportunity for fantasy points to the running back position. So I do think Freeman, even at a 50% share of the work, is a viable cash game option in a phenomenal matchup, right? Like I know you wrote that up this week as well. San Diego, a good matchup for running backs. They're at home. Yep. So I think he's a very good play. And I think you think he's a very good play too as well. So we're definitely on both those guys. How about we got a question here. Best 3K punt play in DK Cash.
DK Cash. Ooh, I don't know if I'm playing anybody in cash at 3K, but if I had to pick, so I think Justin Hunter's interesting, and I think not Adam Humphries. Yeah, it is Adam Humphries. He's 3K, right?
I don't know.
Is he 3K or 31? He's 3K. I think it's probably going to be either Justin Hunter or Adam Humphries. I'm not using a running back at 3K. So it's going to be one of those two for me. And it's pretty tough. I don't think there's any 3K running backs. Is Mike Davis 3K? Yeah, he is 3K. That's interesting because with Carlos Hyde out, Davis should be next on the depth chart in terms of those rushing touches. So I think he's interesting as well, especially because he'll probably be playing from behind in this one, and he does catch passes.
This is a question I've been struggling with my cash lineups, and I'm looking at it in a couple versions where I'm leaving myself about 3K in the flex spot, and I've considered going to 2 tight ends in a cash lineup and having Cameron Braid or something like that as a punt play as my flex. I don't think that's the right way to do it, but that's what I've been looking at as well. All the names you just mentioned as well, I think are options.
So who are we picking if we each had to pick one?
I think I would take Gillislee.
You take Gillislee at 3K?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the 3K punt that I'm going at. I don't think you mentioned about 55 snaps this week. On the year, the Bills have run about just under 60 snaps, but the teams that have played the Dolphins have run just under 70 snaps. So I think there is some potential for them to get up above 60 snaps. And if they do, and if McCoy's seeing 25 to 35, I believe that, which I think that's probably the optimistic projection. He's not going to see more than that probably, but there is potential that he sees less than that if he's not feeling great or if he injures or something.
Sure.
as I've kind of weighed and I expect them to be really run heavy with Robert Woods out. I expect Gillislee to see 15 touches probably, and at 3K, I'm taking that.
Yeah, I might actually go Mike Davis. I think it's because San Francisco is the most rush-heavy team in the league relative to game script. I don't know if that'll change because Mike Davis is in and not Carlos Hyde. But, they also have Colin Kaepernick, who opens up the run game a little bit because of that read option. So Tampa Bay has been good against the run. But I think this might be a situation where Davis could run for maybe a little bit higher yards per carry than Tampa Bay's been allowing because they also have to count for the Kaepernick factor. We do know they play up-tempo, and Mike Davis should see the bulk of the workload here. Sean Drone could see some of the passing down work, which I think concerns me a little bit, especially on DraftKings. But Mike Davis also has been a good pass catcher as well. So I might go Mike Davis just because we know his workload is going to be larger than Gillislee's.
I like it. That's fair enough.
And actually, he makes my cash game lineup look really good.
We have a few questions in the chat here. I don't know. Have you checked the hashtag?
Yeah, I've got a couple questions here in the hashtag. So
do like a little bit of a lightning round if
you want. Lightning round. So looking good, guys. This is from Scott Smith, of course, who designed this wonderful backdrop for us.
Big thank you to Scott.
Yeah, shout out to Scott.
At Scott Smith 610. Follow him on Twitter. He's a huge help, and just want to give a big thank you.
Yep, definitely. So he says, looking at guys, Doyle or Braid is a low-cost tight end this week.
Great for me.
But I do like Doyle given that Dwayne Allen is out. I just think Braid probably has the better upside.
Yeah, without Vincent Jackson there, I really like Braid as the second pass game option, basically.
Yep.
All right. I got one here. It says Demaryius Thomas or DeAndre Hopkins. So we're looking at the Monday night game, and for me, I guess I would take Hopkins. I mean, DT's been struggling. Hopkins has a really tough matchup. I think he's due to bounce back at some point. I think the hate on Hopkins has gone a little bit too far. I don't really like either of those options.
Yeah, Denver as a whole has been taking 12 points off the average of wide receivers. So I'm probably not even going to do Hopkins. I think I'd lean DT on this one. They're both pretty ugly matchups. Now,
right.
This sounds more like a redraft question because I don't know if we're considering prices here. But considering price, let me go pull up the Monday slate here because I don't have their prices in front of me. So I'm going to sit here and talk for 1 second and pretend like I know what I'm doing. And then we're going to click on the Houston-Denver game. So Hopkins at 6,900 and Manny's at 66, Thomas 63. So I think you gotta go Demaryius Thomas in this one. They both have pretty ugly matchups, and DT should be the one I'm gonna use. Slightly bit better matchup, and $600 cheaper. So $600 cheaper isn't anything to sneeze at.
Yeah, but I mean, are you using either of those guys in DFS? I think you're right that might have been a redraft question. I'm not going to be playing either of those guys in DFS.
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason to play either of them in DFS.
Right. Any T.Y. Hilton love? I think T.Y. Hilton gets a little bit under talked about almost every week. It seems like has been getting just a ton of volume. You have Dwayne Allen out now. Obviously, Moncrief isn't back yet. I think there's some potential.
Dorsett's out.
In the big game.
Dorsett's out. Yep.
Oh my God.
So I think T.Y. is actually a really good play because who else are they going to throw to? I actually expect Tennessee to win this game, which means Indy should be throwing. There could be a ton of volume to T.Y. Hilton. And, hey, Devin Smith's a good 3K punt play. Or Devin Street, not Devin Smith.
Is that
he's their only other wide receiver on that offense.
Okay. So T.Y. Hilton's targets by game, 12, 11, 11, 10, 11, 9. That's some really good consistency. Last week he turned those 9 targets into 3 catches for 49 yards, had a down week. People are going to be off him. Almost every other week he's been old.
I think T.Y. is a great comeback play with like some DeMarco Murray rosters. And even, you could even do I was going to say you can do a Mariota DeMarco Delaney stack or a Mariota Delaney stack themselves, and either way you can come back with T.Y. Hilton on those. So
Mariota Delaney Kendall Wright T.Y. Hilton stack.
I like the leverage there with Kendall Wright off of DeMarco Murray or off of Delaney Walker there as well.
Yeah. What else do we have here?
So I want to get your thoughts.
Tate.
What was that?
More questions about Tate. They're asking if he lines up on the left side that Norman plays. PFF has him lined up there.
These guys move around a lot.
They do move around a lot. I wouldn't worry too much about that. And if Norman is potentially going to shadow, I would definitely expect that to be Marvin Jones. So
yeah. If he's going to shadow, it would be Marvin. So I'm not too worried about that. Tate actually plays 54% of his slot snaps not on the left side there, or on the right side, across from the Norman side. So more of his snaps will not be against Norman than will be against Norman in this game.
Right. We got Bacher popping up in the chat saying someone say Kendall Wright, which
yep, somebody did say Kendall Wright. Yep.
Bacher deserves the shout out every time Kendall Wright comes up. I think he's got.
So I wanted to talk about the QB position for a little bit because we haven't really. First of all, earlier in the week we were both kind of giving our thoughts on cash game quarterbacks. We both mentioned Andy Dalton was a good cash game quarterback. We had both mentioned Tom Brady. I thought even Kirk Cousins could potentially be in play in cash. So right there, 59 versus 6,000 with Andy Dalton on DraftKings. Those are two pretty good plays right there. As you're building your cash game lineups now, given all the news, where are you kind of leaning towards on quarterback?
That's part of my issue right now. So I was on Andy Dalton early. My concern with Dalton has become that they're heavy home favorites. We know from research that you did a few years back, I think it was your Roto Academy stuff, that heavy home favorite quarterbacks tend to score a lot of points.
Yep.
But I do have a slight concern in this matchup that they're going to try and get Jeremy Hill going a little bit. We might see some rushing touchdowns. And I can see this game. I don't know. I think maybe I'm being a little bit too cute. But my concern with Dalton is that I don't necessarily think that he throws for 300 yards if they get out ahead. I don't necessarily think that he throws for 3 touchdowns if they start to build a little bit of a lead, that they get a little more conservative. I think the Bengals have a tendency to do that. They tend to go to Jeremy Hill in those games. And Hill's been struggling lately, so maybe it's an opportunity to kind of squeaky wheel Jeremy Hill a little bit, get him some work, get him some action, because I think this game's going to really be tight. So I'm struggling a little bit with Dalton, and so I'm starting to look at Mariota, but now I don't have Murray in a lot of my cash lineups, so now all of a sudden I'm fading Murray and playing Mariota, and it's this looks more like a GPP lineup. I'm leveraging fading Murray. If Murray goes off, I'm going to be screwed. So I don't know if I can go with Mariota. I don't trust Bortles. I like all these matchups too, so it's I just want to pick one out of a hat. I don't know. What are you thinking?
Well, if you're worried about game script getting out of hand, I would say probably the Redskins game is not going to get out of hand. And if it does, it's probably going to come through Kirk Cousins. So I think Cousins is a very good cash game play. I mean, we know Detroit is so bad against the run and the pass. 31st DVOA against the pass, 26 against the rush. Not worried about Jordan Reed being out. Vernon Davis proved capable. So I think Kirk Cousins is interesting, but I'm probably going to go with Andy Dalton in cash. But you're right. I think Jeremy Hill is the ultimate leverage play. I talked about him earlier this week on our podcast. I wrote about him. You wrote him up in your leverage article. Jeremy Hill is the ultimate leverage play off this chalky Bengals pass offense, with AJ Green and Andy Dalton. I love Jeremy Hill in a GPP, but of course, I was trying to talk about quarterbacks here, so I'm probably going to go with Dalton, but then tend to fade him or be underweight on him in GPP. I think is going to be my quarterback strategy this week. Staying on the quarterback position, which QBs do you like in GPPs as you've been kind of getting closer to this weekend's contests?
Mariota's the one that I'm going to be the most overweight on, and I think that's just because whatever my hatred is for DeMarco Murray, it exists, and last week, what we saw from him is something that is closer to what I would have expected from him coming into the year, more just 60 rushing yards, the potential for a TD, not a ton of passing game work, and I think I'm doing a little bit of confirmation bias there. The analyst in me says the guy has gotten a massive workload throughout the year, and he's a great play, and he is a great play. But I do think there's some potential in this situation essentially what I think is the field is too confident that this offense is going to run through Murray this week. The Colts are terrible at defending the pass as well. They're just not a good defense. I think there's some potential that Mariota, Delaney Walker, Kendall Wright, through the middle of the field, that the passing game gets going, that Mariota gets some rushing yardage, and that becomes a really good leverage play off of Murray in a leverage stack. So that's the one that I'm most on. I have some Bortles. I have a little bit of Andy Dalton, and then I've gone up for like Tom Brady and a couple stacks with Gronk and things like that. But
it's pretty interesting. So yeah, you and John Proctor, who's also a great DFS mind, are all over Mariota this week. I have a little bit of Mariota sprinkled in here and there, but I'm actually somebody who's going overweight on DeMarco Murray, which I think my reasoning is, look at last week. We had three or four chalk running backs: Le'Veon Bell, LaShawn McCoy, Lamar Miller, and even the guy who did the worst of those three, Le'Veon Bell, put up 18 points and was still in the winning Millie Maker lineup. So I think DeMarco Murray, even if he puts up 18 points, which I think is like his floor in this game, it's probably about 15 points is his floor. But even if he puts up 18 points, he's cheaper than Le'Veon was last week. He could be in the winning Millie Maker lineup this week. So I might just go really overweight on DeMarco Murray. But in the lineups I'm not using him, I'm definitely leveraging off him with Mariota. That said, the quarterbacks I'm using, Matt Ryan I have a lot of, and Phillip Rivers, that's a high-scoring game. I know they'll be pretty chalky because of that, but I'm trying to do some interesting contrarian things there. We mentioned stacking the San Diego tight ends. I think that's a great way to be contrarian. So Phillip Rivers plus his two tight ends. The other thing I'm doing is I'm using Phillip Rivers in one of the tight ends, and then in the flex I'm playing Rob Gronkowski. Different things like that, just to kind of be contrarian with my chalky QB picks, because that's a great way to be contrarian. I'm also picking some contrarian defenses with these. The Kansas City Chiefs, I think, is a contrarian defense. I think people probably think it's New Orleans, they're going to be off of them, but I'm leveraging that with Kansas City and Spencer Ware. So that's how I'm kind of getting creative off of these chalky plays. And then I've got some Matthew Stafford and some Kirk Cousins. I think that game has the potential to be a shootout. And I've got a lot of Blake Bortles. So those are the kind of the 5 quarterbacks I'm on in GPPs this week. I do have a tiny bit of Dalton sprinkled in. I do have a tiny bit of Mariota sprinkled in. But by and large, I'm on those 5. I guess it's I don't have Derek Carr, so it would be those 5 quarterbacks. I was thinking it was 3 games, so 6 quarterbacks, but I don't have any Derek Carr, so. But yeah, the Oakland, Jacksonville, the Redskins, Detroit, and the San Diego, Atlanta games are the ones I'm targeting the quarterbacks there. I just didn't get any Derek Carr.
I like it. Yeah, Detroit, Stafford's, I think, a good play, a little bit underrated. And essentially, he's at 6,400 on DraftKings. You have all these options at 6,000, 6,100, 6,200. He's a couple $100 more, and I think that he could go a little bit under-owned because of that. Take it off Dalton's, the Mariotas, the Bortles. So I think that's a really smart play as well. We got a question here. Does Jimmy Smith being active change Brandon Marshall for you?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Are you off Marshall?
Yes. I mean, he's got Geno and he's got Jimmy Smith. I'm not a Geno guy. I'm all over, I think Mike Wallace is a great play here. And if you are playing Wallace, Marshall could be a good comeback play. I just wouldn't use a lot of them. I'm not going to use them at all.
I think the interesting thing with Marshall is he could be a little bit. I expect him to be pretty under-owned based on his price point being just a little bit less, kind of awkwardly priced, a little bit less than the guys that people want to go up for, which a lot of people are talking about. Allen Robinson, Mike Evans, a little bit higher up. You have Green and Julio. You also have Amari Cooper, a little bit higher. So I think there won't be a ton of people that just settle on Brandon Marshall. Obviously, Geno was a talking point. I don't think the downgrade's that bad. It's not like Ryan Fitzpatrick's been playing lights out football this year. He's not. How much worse can Geno Smith be than what Ryan Fitzpatrick has given the Jets this year? And he hasn't been horrible when he's played. He's willing to take shots. He's not like a check down artist or anything. So
yep.
I think there's potential there for Marshall to have a decent game. I think he's got a little bit of a pivot appeal, but I'm kind of with you that Jimmy Smith does downgrade it a little bit. And to be frank and to full disclosure, I'm not getting Marshall into any of my lineups because I'm going up to those receivers, which is probably a mistake. I think that's where.
All right, so Ben, we've got some actives and inactives already coming in. Tyler Eifert active. What does that do for you?
Oh, that was expected. I mean, I don't know if he'll play a full complement of snaps. He definitely has touchdown potential. Honestly, I think that there's a lot of potential for him to score. Just
yep.
And I know I already made the Jeremy Hill thing, but I think that's kind of he's had a rough road back, and one of those things where they're playing the Browns. They love to feature their tight ends in the red zone. I think they could make it a point to use him in the red zone.
So is Eifert the ultimate leverage play?
Yeah, probably.
Because I know a lot of the sharps have been talking up Jeremy Hill this week. Not that I'm sharp or anything, but a lot of people have been talking up Jeremy Hill as a good leverage play. But I think Tyler Eifert could be the ultimate leverage play here.
I think you're making some sense. It's not a bad play. I question his snaps, but he could have a 2-touchdown game pretty easily. I think that's
and see, that's always the case with him, and that's why I think it's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's see. We also have LaShawn McCoy is active. That's confirmed. Stephon Diggs will be active. What do you think of Stephon Diggs this week?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this off the air. I think he's a really good contrarian play. Essentially, I mean, we've talked him up on the RotoViz airwaves all offseason. I won't spend too much time, but we really like Diggs long term. We saw some really good stuff in weeks 1 and week 2. I think he was playing a little bit banged up in weeks 3 and 4. We didn't see as much of an upside. The appeal here is that the ownership is going to be way down. They just came off a bye. He missed the games before that. People think he's banged up. He's not. He's healthy. They came off a bye, and he's been out for a couple weeks, and he almost played the game before the bye, but I think they just held him out to give him 2 extra weeks because the bye was coming up. I definitely think he has potential to just have a blow-up spot because he's that good. We think he's that good. I don't know that the Eagles, they're not a great matchup, but I don't know that they're going to
So
I think people are going to, I think we both think that people are going to think a lot more positively in general about Stephon Diggs 2-3 months from now.
Yep.
We think he's the real deal.
Yeah, I agree. I've been using him. I have him about 8 to 10% right now in my GPP lineups, and I think that's going to be over his ownership. So I am getting a little bit of leverage there. Not a ton, but I am a little bit overweight compared to what I think he'll be. I think he'll probably be 4 to 5% owned tops. Some other inactives. Steve Smith confirmed inactive. Joe Flacco is active. We've got Latavius Murray is active. Allen Hurns active. Deshaun Jackson active. Dwayne Washington, of course, inactive. And Ebron and Riddick. Julius Thomas active. Any news there that interests you from a DFS perspective on any of those things I just said? Oh, Terrell Pryor also active.
Almost all of that was what we expected. And kind of to that point, it's been interesting to see that the new questionable tags and all that stuff, we've actually seemed to get some pretty good information. I would say that we haven't had a ton of surprise inactives an hour and a half before the games.
Yeah.
That's just an aside, but I think that what we're seeing now is what we heard, an hour ago when we went live at the beginning of the show. So I think for me, it doesn't change much. This is kind of a confirmation of what we thought. I thought Eifert would be active as well. So I don't think.
I think Eifert was my biggest question mark of anybody. Yeah. And that news is probably the most confirming and I would say the most tilting for me.
Yeah, well, they're saying here, BeatWriters expect him, on RotoWorld, it says BeatWriters expect him to be seriously limited in his season debut. He's probably only going to play about 15 to 20 snaps. It could be red zone and third down packages. The red zone thing is interesting. I don't think I'm going to play him.
Yeah, I think the fact that nobody probably will play him, given that news, will be, a reason to play him. But I really like using the New England tight ends and the San Diego tight ends this week. I've got a little bit of Braid in there, but that's about it. So that's about how it goes.
I really like Delaney as well this week. I think he's going to go under own because he burned people like me in cash last week, but he's in another phenomenal spot. The Colts are terrible against tight ends.
Yeah.
I love me some Delaney this week.
Yep. All right. So we're at 45 minutes in. That's kind of what we had planned. Do you have any final thoughts? Any last words? I know we want to get to our lineups here and edit a couple things, but any last thoughts, Ben?
I actually have an interesting question here. DK Cash, Julio, AJ Green, and Garcon, or AJ Green, Evans, and Golden Tate?
So say that again. Julio Jones, AJ Green, Pierre Garcon.
So AJ Green's in both. Essentially, it's Julio and Garcon, or Evans and Golden Tate?
Evans and Tate, but that's going to be chalky. I don't think Garcon. So here's the thing with Garcon, and it sounds like it's a GPP question. Garcon doesn't have. Oh, cash.
It says DK cash.
Yeah.
I think Evans and Golden Tate is a decent two-man option in cash. You could go to Julio and Garcon. I don't think that's out of the question by any means, but actually, that's interesting. I think that's interesting. I think Garcon's an interesting play. I wasn't considering for cash, but he has been seeing a lot of volume, and I think he could very well be a cash option with the readout. With Jackson banged up, he's active, but Sean Jackson is banged up. I just think they use a lot of options. That you do have now a couple of them banged up here.
I like Crowder better than Garcon this week. I think Crowder with the best matchup there. Pierre Garcon has the worst matchup of all the three. He pretty much explicitly plays on the outside these days. He lines up on the left side over half of his snaps, where he'll be facing Nevin Lawson. And Darius Slay's been bad this year. He's been rated well by Pro Football Focus, which I think is kind of misleading because he's allowed the most snaps or the most targets per route on that team, the most fantasy points per route on that team. Maybe it's just a volume thing because he's typically facing wide receiver ones, but Nevin Lawson has been very good this year. He's allowed the fewest in both targets and points per route, which is interesting because usually the slot guy will get fewer targets than the other outside guys. So I think Jamison Crowder, if I'm paying down at a Redskins wide receiver, is the one I'd rather have. I think he actually has a chance for some decent volume this week in a good matchup.
Yeah, the problem for me with him is that his volume is kind of cratered a little bit. I mean, it was the first few weeks he was among the leaders on the offense, and I just put it up here. He had 10, 8, and 7 targets over the first 3 weeks, but the last 3 weeks it's been 3, 3, and 4. He had a strong 351 touchdown line last week, but that is a little bit of a concern is just how many targets will he see.
Yep.
But I agree with you. I think that Crowder makes Garcon's situation a little bit cloudier. So I think in terms of the question, I would go with Evans and Tate, mainly because I think Evans has the potential to match Julio, frankly.
Yeah.
I don't think that much.
I agree. I think Evans definitely has Julio upside. And like you mentioned, I think Atlanta could dump off a lot of passes the running back position this week. So Tate and Evans for me, definitely. Okay, any last thoughts here, Ben? Big picture, cash GPP.
Mike Wallace, I think, is a really interesting play this week. Steve Smith is out. Mike Wallace over the last 3 weeks has had 29 targets, 9, 9, and 10, or excuse me, 9, 9, and 11, I think. So at least a minimum of 9 targets in each of the last 3 weeks. People are off him because he hasn't scored touchdowns since week 2. He scored 3 TDs in the first 2 games. Hasn't scored a TD for 4 weeks. But the reality is, back in the first 3 games, he was seeing only 6 targets a game. His volume's up. Steve Smith's out. I don't really buy into Brashad Perriman until I see it because, frankly, I don't really buy into guys who have 42-year-old knees. Kamar Aiken didn't play a whole ton. Perriman could be a usable player down the line, but I want to see that. So for me right now, I think Wallace is a clear-cut wide receiver 1. I expect him to get close to 10 targets. The question is Flacco's arm strength. The Jets can get beat deep. He's a perfect match for beating them deep, and I'm going to take that gamble, assuming that Flacco's healthier than letting on.
So,
Burns one.
What do you think his ownership percentage will be, and how much would you want to have him in GPPs?
I think his ownership percentage will be 5%. I don't think it's going to be high, or maybe even lower.
I think it'll be higher. I think it'll be like 8 to 10%.
Okay.
But how much would you have him, given either your guess and or my guess, or the combined version of our guess?
25 to 33%. I think I'm willing to risk a quarter to a third of my lineups that I think he has a pretty stable floor. Even if he's been running some shorter routes, some mid-range routes, he's not just a deep threat. I mentioned on the pod on Thursday, I don't think I've ever owned Mike Wallace in DFS. I'm not a fan of Mike Wallace's. I think coming into the year, I didn't draft him. I kind of think that he's not that great, but he's been very effective this year and got the volume. So that's where I'm at. What do you think in terms of percentages?
Yeah, I currently have 12% of them, but I'm looking to get more. The problem is I've had a hard time fitting in these middle range wide receivers because of the way my roster construction has generally worked out, because I am on DeMarco Murray so much. But when I am using that mid range, I'm either using Diggs or Mike Wallace. Those have been my two go-to guys in that range. I do have some Deshaun Jackson as well, because I am obviously playing some Kirk Cousins, so I'm going to want some Deshaun Jackson shares, and I do like that matchup. So I guess those are the three guys I'm going with in that mid range.
And Tate as well.
Well, Tate's down to 4,900, so I'm talking like that 6K-ish ballpark area. We got 6,800 or 6,000, 5,800, 5,700 for those three guys. So those are the three I'm really going with at that like 6K ballpark price tag. So I think my final thought this week is I'm fading New Orleans. I really like leveraging that Kansas City run game, and I am fading, I guess, this Jets, Baltimore Ravens game other than Mike Wallace. So I do like using the Ravens defense as well. But I guess my biggest takeaway is these running back defense stacks. The Chiefs and Spencer Ware, the Bengals and Jeremy Hill, and the Titans and DeMarco Murray, I think, are three great stacks. I even think if you really want to get kind of leveraged, I think this Oakland-Jacksonville game could be pretty high scoring, or high ownership percentage, but Blake Bortles turns the ball over. So I think Oakland, leveraging that with Latavius Murray, will be highly leveraged, super low owned, because Latavius Murray probably won't be highly owned because of his injury situation and that back situation there. You could even just do the Raiders defense without Latavius Murray, and that's just fine as well. But I'm looking to leverage these defenses, because what we found, and Max Steinberg, he does a lot of Daily Fantasy Winner podcasts over on YouTube. He does some great stuff, but he's found that the defense position hasn't really mattered for winning GPPs this year. So why not pick a low owned one and hope they have a good day?
Fair enough. How about Mike Davis in the 49ers stack? That's kind of the contrarian one that I'm putting in a couple spots. I do think there's some potential for Sean Drone to play and score more than Davis, but
very good. Yeah, I think what I'll probably do is I'll probably use Davis in cash is kind of where I'm leaning now.
Okay.
And so I don't disagree. I think that's actually a pretty neat thought to do that in a GPP. But I'll probably use Davis in cash and then avoid him in GPP, because I like to hedge a little bit. So like doing the same thing with Dalton, probably using him in cash and fading him in GPP.
Yeah, that's just a really leveraged play on the Bucs, who are going to all be really high owned. You're going to have Rodgers, Brate, Mike Evans, and even Jameis is going to have a little bit of ownership, and even Adam Humphries is going to have a little bit of ownership.
Yep.
Those other three main guys are going to be really high owned as low cost guys. Evans isn't particularly low cost, but I think he's low cost relative to his potential. I think he should be a top 2 or 3.
Yep.
Frankly. Yeah, I'm good though. That's all I'm thinking.
I think that's going to be a wrap. So first we want to give, again, another shout out to Scott Smith. He gave this backdrop to us. Don't forget the listeners and viewer discount, 30% discount if you go to rotoviz.com/podcast. Subscribe to RotoViz, and you'll get all our content, NFL content, at a 30% discount. So, that's a really good deal. And make sure to check out our On the Daily DFS podcast. It airs every Thursday morning, as Ben said. A lot of work went into this. Thanks, Matt Friedman, of course, for helping also put all this together. A lot of people helped us test the audio and different things like that. Fantasy Douche, for example. So, just a lot of work to make this come together. And we'll be doing this every week. So, drop us an email. Actually, so it's rotovizlive@gmail.com. So rotovizlive@gmail.com. Drop us an email. Give us some feedback, what you'd like to hear in future weeks, or how we can make this show even better going forward. And, of course, follow us at Yards Per Gretch. That's Ben Gretch. And I'm Nick Giffen at RotoDoc. Thanks for tuning in.